My sister Brooklyn looked at my wedding dress hanging in my closet and burst out laughing. "Seriously, Sadie, you're wearing that cheap polyester nightmare to marry Derek? It looks like something from a clearance rack at a gas station." She held up her phone, snapping photos while cackling. "Wait until Mom sees this disaster. She's going to die." But what Brooklyn didn't know was that this cheap trash had a very expensive secret hidden inside, one that would make her eat every single word. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The whole mess started 3 months before my wedding to Derek Chen. When Brooklyn decided to move back home to Portland after her divorce from that investment banker she'd been bragging about for years. Suddenly, our quiet house on Maple Street became her personal runway show, with designer bags scattered across the kitchen counter and her endless complaints about how provincial everything was compared to her life in Manhattan. Brooklyn had always been the golden child, the one who got into Columbia, landed the high-paying job at a marketing firm, married rich, and lived in that ridiculous penthouse apartment she never stopped posting about on Instagram. Meanwhile, I was just Sadie, the younger sister who stayed home, became a kindergarten teacher, and was apparently settling for a basic life with Derek, who worked as a software engineer for a local startup. The dress drama began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I was in my childhood bedroom, carefully steaming the gown I'd chosen for the big day. It wasn't flashy or covered in crystals, just an elegant, simple design in ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing train. To me, it was perfect, classic, timeless, and exactly what I'd always dreamed of wearing when I walked down the aisle. Brooklyn barged in without knocking, as usual, carrying her third latte of the day and wearing one of those oversized blazers that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Oh my God, what is that?" she said, her voice dripping with horror as she spotted the dress hanging on my closet door. "It's my wedding dress," I replied, not looking up from the steamer. She set down her coffee and approached the dress like it was a crime scene, her manicured fingers reaching out to touch the fabric. "Sadie, honey, this feels like cheap polyester. Where did you even buy this thing? Don't tell me you went to one of those discount bridal warehouses." Heat crept up my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "It's silk, Brooklyn, and I got it from a boutique downtown." "A boutique?" She laughed, that sharp sound that had haunted my childhood whenever she thought something I did was ridiculous. "What? Boutique? The one next to the payday loan place? Because this seriously looks like something you'd find in the bargain bin at Walmart." I turned off the steamer and faced her. Not everything has to cost $5,000 to be beautiful. "Oh, sweetie." Her voice took on that condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. "I spent 12 grand on my Vera Wang, and it was worth every penny. That's what a real wedding dress looks like. This..." She gestured at my gown with disgust. "This is just sad. You're going to look like you're playing dress-up in Mom's old curtains." The comment about Mom's curtains hit especially hard because our mother had been an amazing seamstress who made beautiful things out of simple materials. She'd passed away 2 years earlier, and Brooklyn knew exactly how much that comparison would sting. "You know what?" Brooklyn continued, pulling out her phone. "I need to document this. Mom would have been mortified to see you walking down the aisle in this disaster." She started snapping photos from different angles, making exaggerated faces of shock and disappointment. "The lace looks like it came from a craft store. And don't even get me started on this train. It's going to drag on the ground and pick up every piece of dirt in that outdoor venue you insisted on." Derek had proposed at Laurelhurst Park during cherry blossom season, and we'd fallen in love with the idea of getting married there in the spring, surrounded by blooming trees and natural beauty. It wasn't the Four Seasons ballroom Brooklyn had used for her wedding, but it meant something to us. "The venue is going to be beautiful," I said, hanging the dress back up carefully. "And so is the dress. Sadie, listen to me." Brooklyn sat on my bed, adopting her serious big sister voice. I'm trying to help you here. You have 3 months to find something decent. I have connections in New York. I could make some calls, get you into the sample sales. There's still time to fix this. There's nothing to fix. She stood up, shaking her head. Fine. Don't say I didn't try to save you from public embarrassment. But when people are whispering about how cheap your dress looks in the wedding photos, remember this conversation. After she left, I sat alone with my dress, running my fingers over the smooth silk and intricate lacework. Brooklyn's words echoed in my head, making me second-guess everything. Was it really that obvious? Did it look cheap? Would people judge me for not spending a fortune on one day? But then I remembered the afternoon I'd found it. I'd been dress shopping for weeks, trying on gowns that cost more than my car payment, and feeling overwhelmed by the pressure to find something perfect. The boutique on Northwest 23rd had been my last stop, and I was almost ready to give up when the owner, Mrs. Patterson, brought out this dress from the back room. The moment I put it on, everything changed. It fit like it was made for me, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw the bride I wanted to be. Not someone trying to impress others, but someone who felt beautiful and confident and ready to marry the man she loved. Mrs. Patterson had been mysterious about the dress's origins, saying only that it had come from a very special collection and that she'd been waiting for the right person to appreciate it. The price was surprisingly reasonable, much less than I'd budgeted, which should have been my first clue that there was more to the story. Over the next few days, Brooklyn's criticism intensified. She'd make little comments at dinner about how important it was to invest in quality and how wedding photos lasted forever. She showed me pictures from her own wedding, pointing out details of her expensive gown and explaining why it had been worth the splurge. "See how the silk catches the light?" she'd say, zooming in on photos of herself dancing with her ex-husband. "That's what real quality looks like. Your dress is going to be photographed like a cheap Halloween costume." She even recruited our Aunt Linda into the campaign, calling her one evening when we were all watching TV together. "Aunt Linda, you have to talk to Sadie about her wedding dress," Brooklyn said, putting the phone on speaker. "It's a complete disaster. She's going to regret it for the rest of her life." But Aunt Linda, who had known our mother better than anyone, surprised us both with her response. "Brooklyn, honey," she said in her gentle voice, "your mother always said that the most beautiful thing a bride can wear is confidence. If Sadie loves her dress, that's all that matters." Brooklyn rolled her eyes and ended the call, but I felt a little better knowing that at least someone understood. The final straw came the weekend before the wedding, when Brooklyn invited her friend Madison over for brunch. Madison had been her college roommate and was just as status-conscious as Brooklyn, with a husband who worked on Wall Street and a lifestyle to match. I was coming downstairs to grab some coffee when I heard them talking in the kitchen. I'm telling, "You, Madison? It's tragic," Brooklyn was saying. "She's going to look like she bought her dress at a thrift store. I've tried everything to convince her to upgrade, but she's being so stubborn. Maybe she genuinely can't afford anything better." Madison replied, "Teaching kindergarten doesn't exactly pay well. That's what makes it even sadder. She could have asked me for help, or at least let me take her shopping in New York. Instead, she's determined to embarrass herself in front of everyone." I stood, frozen on the stairs, listening to them dissect my choices like I was some kind of charity case. The worst part was that Brooklyn genuinely seemed to believe she was looking out for me, that her criticism came from a place of love rather than the need to prove her own superiority. That afternoon, I drove to Mrs. Patterson's boutique, hoping to talk to her about my doubts. The store was quiet, with late afternoon sunlight filtering through the front windows and casting everything in a golden glow. "Sadie, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, looking up from the vintage lace she was carefully cataloging. "How are the wedding preparations going?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," I said, feeling embarrassed. "My sister thinks the dress looks cheap. She keeps saying it's not good enough for my wedding." Mrs. Patterson set down her work and studied my face carefully. "And what do you think?" "I love it," I admitted. But now I'm wondering if I'm making a mistake. What if she's right? What if people judge me for not spending more money? A small smile played at the corners of Mrs. Patterson's mouth. Would you like to know something about your dress, Sadie? I nodded, suddenly curious about the mysterious story behind my gown. That dress, she said, walking over to a filing cabinet and pulling out a folder, is from the private collection of Elena Marchetti. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The name didn't mean anything to me, but Mrs. Patterson's reverential tone suggested it should have. Elena was one of the most sought-after couture designers in Europe during the 1990s and early 2000s. She only made about 50 dresses per year, all custom pieces for celebrities, royalty, and the ultra-wealthy. Each dress was completely hand-sewn, using the finest materials money could buy. She opened the folder and showed me photographs of stunning gowns, each more beautiful than the last. Then she pointed to a picture that made my heart skip a beat. It was my dress, or one exactly like it, being worn by a woman at what looked like a very exclusive event. This particular design was created for the daughter of a tech billionaire in Silicon Valley, Mrs. Patterson continued. The bride changed her mind at the last minute and chose a different dress, so this one was never worn. The family donated it to a charity auction, where I acquired it for the boutique. The original price tag was $45,000. Hands trembled as I stared at the photograph. $45,000. The number seemed impossible, surreal. I looked up at Mrs. Patterson, who was watching me with kind eyes behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Are you absolutely certain this is the same dress? I whispered. She nodded, pulling out a certificate of authenticity from the folder. Elena Marchetti's signature is right here, along with the dress specifications. Every stitch was done by hand using silk imported from Lyon, France, and the lace was created by artisans in Belgium using techniques that date back centuries. The beadwork alone took 3 weeks to complete. I sank into one of the vintage chairs in her boutique, trying to process this information. But why didn't you tell me this when I bought it? Mrs. Patterson sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. Because, dear, I wanted to see if you loved the dress for what it was, not for its pedigree. Too many brides get caught up in labels and price tags instead of choosing something that truly speaks to their heart. You fell in love with this gown the moment you put it on, and that's exactly how it should be. She was right. I had felt something magical that first day, standing in front of the three-way mirror in her fitting room. The dress had seemed to transform me, making me feel like the most beautiful version of myself. What do I do with this information? I asked, still clutching the certificate. Whatever feels right to you, she replied simply. I drove home in a daze, the folder tucked safely in my passenger seat. Brooklyn's rental car was in the driveway, and I could hear her voice through the kitchen window as she talked on the phone with someone about wedding gift ideas for another friend's upcoming ceremony. Inside, she was leaning against the counter, gesturing dramatically as she spoke. No, trust me, crystal is always a safe choice. Much better than those tacky personalized picture frames everyone's doing these days. When she saw me, she wrapped up her call quickly. How was your day? Please tell me you finally came to your senses and went dress shopping. Actually, I went to see Mrs. Patterson at the boutique. Brooklyn's face lit up with hope. And? Did she agree that you need something better? I bet she has connections with real designers. I sat down at our old kitchen table, the same one where we'd done homework as kids and where Mom used to help us with school projects. The weight of what I'd learned felt enormous. She told me something interesting about my dress, I said carefully. Oh God, what now? Don't tell me it's some vintage piece from the 1980s that she's trying to pass off as retro chic. I opened the folder and spread the contents across the table. Brooklyn's mocking expression shifted to curiosity as she approached. What is all this? Documentation for my dress. Apparently, it's a designer's original. Brooklyn picked up one of the photographs, squinting at it. This looks like your dress, but where did you get these pictures? The dress was created by Elena Marchetti for a private client. It was never worn and eventually donated to charity, where Mrs. Patterson acquired it. Elena Marchetti? Brooklyn's voice had changed, taking on a note I'd never heard before. The Elena Marchetti? You know her? Brooklyn sank into the chair across from me, still staring at the photograph. Sadie, Elena Marchetti she was one of the most exclusive couture designers in the world. Her waiting list was years long. Celebrities would literally beg to wear her creations to the Met Gala. She picked up the certificate of authenticity, reading it twice before looking up at me with wide eyes. This says the original value was $45,000. I know. You know? You know? Her voice rose to a near shriek. Sadie, do you understand what this means? You're wearing a museum-quality couture gown to your wedding? This is like finding a Picasso at a garage sale. I watched my sister's face cycle, through emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like awe. How much did you pay for it? She asked quietly. $800. Brooklyn actually gasped. $800? For a $45,000 Elena Marchetti original? Mrs. Patterson said she wanted it to go to someone who would love it, for the right reasons. For the first time in weeks, Brooklyn was completely speechless. She kept picking up different pieces of documentation, examining them like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. The silk is from Lyon, she murmured, almost to herself. And this lace. I remember reading about Elena's Belgian lace suppliers in Vogue. They only worked with the finest ateliers in Bruges. She looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine admiration. Sadie, I owe you an apology, a huge apology. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She pushed the papers aside and leaned forward. I've been horrible to you about this dress. I judged it based on what I thought it was, not on what it actually is. And even if it had been from Walmart, I had no right to make you feel bad about your choice. This wasn't the Brooklyn I knew. The sister I grew up with never admitted when she was wrong, never apologized without being forced to. I guess I've been so focused on proving that my expensive taste was right that I forgot what actually matters, she continued. You found something beautiful that makes you happy, and instead of celebrating that with you, I tried to tear it down. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I understand why you reacted that way. Everything in your world has been about status and showing success. But that's not what this wedding is about for me. I know that now. She squeezed back. And honestly, even without knowing about Elena Marchetti, I should have seen how happy the dress makes you. That should have been enough. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing this dramatic shift in our relationship. Can I ask you something? Brooklyn said eventually. Sure. Are you going to tell people about the designer? Because honestly, this is going to blow their minds. I considered this question. Part of me wanted to keep the secret, to let the dress speak for itself without the weight of its pedigree. But another part of me, the part that had endured weeks of criticism and doubt, felt a surge of vindication. I don't know yet. What do you think I should do? Brooklyn smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm smile she'd given me since moving back home. I think you should wear it with pride, regardless of what you choose to share. But if it were me, I'd probably enjoy watching people's reactions when they find out. That evening, Derek came over for dinner, and I decided to tell him about the day's revelation. His reaction was everything I could have hoped for: amazement, followed by laughter, followed by a kiss that made me remember exactly why I was marrying him. So you're telling me, he said, grinning, that my fiancé has better taste in designer fashion than most Hollywood stylists? Apparently. Well, I always knew you were extraordinary. Now I have documentation to prove it. Brooklyn, who had stayed for dinner, watched our interaction with something that looked like wistfulness. I realized that in all the time she'd been married to her investment banker, I'd never seen them share the kind of easy affection that Derek and I had. "You two are really happy, aren't you?" she asked as we cleared the dishes. "We are," I confirmed. "I'm sorry I ever suggested you were settling. Derek is perfect for you." That night, after Derek went home and Brooklyn had gone upstairs, I stood in my room looking at the dress hanging in my closet. Tomorrow, Mrs. Patterson was coming for the final fitting, and in just 5 days, I would be walking down the aisle wearing a masterpiece created by one of the world's most celebrated designers. But more than that, I would be wearing a dress that had already taught me something valuable about not judging things or people by their surface appearance. My cheap Walmart trash had turned out to be a treasure beyond measure, just like my supposedly settling relationship with Derek was actually the greatest love of my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a world obsessed with labels and price tags, I'd stumbled into both luxury and authenticity without even trying. Sometimes the best things really do come in unexpected packages. The morning of my wedding dawned crisp and clear, with cherry blossoms in full bloom at Laurelhurst Park. I woke up in my childhood bedroom for the last time as a single woman, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains Mom had made years ago. Brooklyn was already up, bustling around the kitchen in silk pajamas and a face mask, orchestrating breakfast like a military operation. The transformation in her attitude over the past few days had been remarkable. She'd thrown herself into wedding preparations with the same intensity she'd once used to criticize my choices, but now it was all focused on making my day perfect. "Morning, bride-to-be," she called out, not looking up from the French toast she was preparing. "I made your favorite, and there's fresh coffee. Mrs. Patterson will be here in an hour for any last-minute adjustments, and the photographer arrives at 11. I sat at the kitchen table, marveling at this version of my sister. "You don't have to do all this, you know." "Are you kidding? This is Elena Marchetti's wedding dress debut in Portland, Oregon. I'm not letting anything go wrong." She set a plate in front of me, and I noticed she'd arranged the berries in a perfect heart shape. Such a small gesture, but it meant everything, after weeks of tension between us. "Brooke, can I ask you something?" "Sure." She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. "Why do you think you reacted so strongly to the dress? I mean, even before you knew what it was." She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "Honestly, I think I was projecting my own insecurities onto you." "What do you mean?" "After my divorce, I've been questioning everything about the choices I made. I spent so much money trying to prove I belonged in Marcus's world. The expensive clothes, the fancy apartment, the $12,000 wedding dress that didn't save my marriage. When I saw your dress, it represented everything I convinced myself was beneath me, but secretly worried I actually belonged to." She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "You were so confident in your choice, so happy with your simple life and your genuine relationship. Part of me resented that because I'd lost myself trying to be someone I'm not." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You know you belong here, right? This is your home, too. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I'm starting to figure that out," she said, squeezing my hand. "Watching you and Derek together reminded me what authentic happiness looks like." Mrs. Patterson arrived precisely at 9, carrying her sewing kit and wearing the same gentle smile she'd had the first day I met her. Behind her was a younger woman with striking silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. "Sadie, I'd like you to meet someone very special," Mrs. Patterson said as they entered. "This is Carmen Rodriguez. She worked as Elena Marchetti's head seamstress for 15 years. My mouth dropped open. "You brought Elena's seamstress to my wedding?" Carmen stepped forward with a warm smile. "When Mrs. Patterson told me about your dress, I had to come see it. Elena would have been so pleased to know one of her creations found such a loving home." "You knew Elena personally?" I was with her from her first collection until she retired. She always said that her dresses had souls, and they would find their way to the right person when the time was ready. Carmen examined the dress with the practiced eye of a master craftsperson, running her fingers along the seams and nodding approvingly. This is some of our finest work. I remember this piece specifically because Elena spent extra time on the lace placement. She wanted it to look like it was growing naturally from the silk. As I put on the dress for what would hopefully be the gay final fitting, Carmen shared stories about Elena's atelier in Florence, the famous clients who had worn her creations, and the meticulous process that went into each piece. Elena would spend weeks just selecting the right silk, Carmen explained, as she made a tiny adjustment to the sleeve. She believed that the fabric had to sing to her before she would use it. This particular silk came from a family mill that had been operating since the 1800s. Brooklyn watched in fascination, asking technical questions about the construction and beading techniques. I realized this was probably the closest she'd ever get to the world of haute couture she'd always admired from afar. "The dress fits you perfectly," Carmen announced after examining every seam. Elena always said that when a dress finds its true owner, no alterations are needed. The dress recognizes its destiny. By late morning, our house had transformed into a wedding center. Derek's sister Melissa arrived to help with makeup, followed by my college friend Rachel and Derek's cousin Amy, who were serving as bridesmaids. The energy was infectious. Everyone was excited and happy, creating exactly the warm, celebratory atmosphere I'd dreamed of. Brooklyn had appointed herself as my personal stylist and wedding coordinator, making sure every detail was perfect. She'd even gone out and bought special lighting equipment to ensure the dress was photographed beautifully. I researched Elena Marchetti's preferred photography techniques, she explained while adjusting a ring light. Apparently, her dresses were designed to look stunning under natural lighting with just a touch of enhancement. As I sat in the makeup chair, watching my reflection transform, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not just for the incredible dress I was wearing, but for the journey that had led me to this moment. The weeks of criticism from Brooklyn had initially shaken my confidence, but ultimately they'd led to the discovery of something extraordinary and the healing of our relationship. "You look absolutely radiant," Melissa said as she applied the finishing touches to my makeup. "Derek is going to lose his mind when he sees you." Through the window, I could see guests beginning to arrive at the park. Derek's parents, my Aunt Linda, co-workers from the school where I taught, neighbors who'd watched me grow up on Maple Street. About 60 people total, intimate enough that everyone felt like family. Brooklyn appeared at my shoulder, holding a small wrapped box. "I have something for you. It's something new." Inside was a delicate pair of pearl earrings, clearly expensive, but chosen with genuine thoughtfulness. "They're from Mikimoto," she said. But more importantly, they belonged to Mom. Dad gave them to her for their 10th anniversary. "I've been saving them for a special occasion." Tears sprang to my eyes as I put them on. Mom would have loved this day, loved seeing her daughters united instead of competing, and loved watching me marry Derek in a dress that represented everything. She believed about finding beauty in unexpected places. "She would be so proud of both of us today," Brooklyn whispered, and I knew she was thinking the same thing. Carmen made one final inspection of the dress before I left for the ceremony, smoothing the train and adjusting the lace sleeves with reverent care. "Elena would have loved seeing her creation worn with such joy," she said. "This is exactly what she intended when she designed it, to make a bride feel like the most beautiful woman in the world." As we prepared to leave for the park, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror in the hallway. The woman looking back at me was confident, radiant, and ready to marry the love of her life. The dress was stunning, but more than that, it felt like me, like the best version of myself. Brooklyn stood behind me, also reflected in the mirror, and for the first time in years, we looked like sisters instead of competitors. "Ready?" she asked, picking up the train carefully. More than ready. As we walked out the door, I thought about all the unexpected twists that had led to this moment. Sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as something ordinary, waiting for the right person to recognize their true worth. My dress had taught me that lesson, and now I was about to marry a man who had always seen my value, regardless of any external validation. The cherry blossoms were waiting, Derek was waiting, and I was finally ready to step into my future wearing a masterpiece that had found its way to exactly where it belonged. The walk from the parking area to the ceremony site felt like floating through a dream. Carmen held my train while Brooklyn walked beside me, both of them acting as my personal entourage. The cherry trees formed a natural canopy overhead, their pink petals occasionally drifting down like confetti. Derek's groomsmen were already positioned at the altar, a simple wooden arch decorated with white roses and trailing ivy. I could see Derek's back as he faced the officiant, and my heart started racing with anticipation. In just a few minutes, I'd be walking down that petal-strewn aisle toward my future. But first, I had to navigate the pre-ceremony mingling, and that's when things got interesting. Derek's Aunt Patricia was the first to spot me as our wedding party gathered near the entrance. She was one of those women who prided herself on knowing designer labels from 50 feet away, and she'd always made subtle comments about my quaint teaching job and modest lifestyle. "Oh my," she said, approaching with her usual air of forced politeness. "Sadie, your dress is lovely, very simple and clean. I'm sure it was quite affordable." Before I could respond, Brooklyn stepped forward with a smile that could have powered the city. "Actually, Aunt Patricia, it's an Elena Marchetti original, couture, hand-sewn in Florence. The silk is from Lyon, and the Belgian lace took 3 weeks to complete." Patricia's expression went through several rapid changes: confusion, disbelief, then something approaching panic as she processed this information. "Elena Marchetti? But that's impossible. Those dresses cost tens of thousands of dollars." Carmen, overhearing the conversation, joined our little group. "This particular piece was valued at $45,000, she said matter-of-factly. "I should know. I was Elena's head seamstress when we created it." The color drained from Patricia's face. She'd spent the last 2 years making subtle digs about my simple lifestyle, and now she was learning that I was wearing a dress worth more than her car. I had no idea," she stammered. "It's absolutely stunning. Where did you find such an incredible piece?" "A lovely boutique downtown," I replied graciously. "Sometimes the best things are hidden in unexpected places." Word spread through the gathering guests like wildfire. Derek's college friend Marcus, who worked in fashion retail, overheard Patricia's shocked conversation with her husband and immediately came over to examine the dress more closely. "No way," he breathed, circling me like I was a museum exhibit. "Is this really Elena Marchetti? I've only seen her work in magazines. Can I take a closer look at the beadwork?" Soon I found myself surrounded by a small crowd of guests who had transformed from making polite small talk to genuine amazement. Derek's sophisticated cousin Elena, ironically named, was nearly in tears as she examined the lace sleeves. "I wrote my senior thesis on European couture houses," she explained. "Elena Marchetti was legendary. Her techniques were considered trade secrets. This dress belongs in the Metropolitan Museum of Art." Brooklyn was in her element, fielding questions and providing details about the dress's provenance with the authority of someone who'd spent days researching every aspect of Elena's work. She'd completely transformed from the sister who'd mocked my choice to my proudest advocate. "The most amazing part," Brooklyn told the growing crowd, "is that Sadie chose this dress before she knew anything about the designer. She fell in love with it based purely on how it made her feel." Mrs. Patterson, who had arrived to witness the ceremony, watched the commotion with twinkling eyes. "That's exactly how it should be," she told anyone who would listen. "A dress should choose its Bride as much as the bride chooses the dress. Derek's mother, who had initially been politely concerned about my budget-conscious wedding planning, was now taking photos of the dress from every angle and texting them to her friends with messages like, "My daughter-in-law is wearing Elena. Marchetti!" The most satisfying reaction came from Madison, Brooklyn's former college roommate who had driven up from San Francisco for the wedding. She was the one who'd been making catty comments about my thrift store aesthetic during that awful brunch conversation I'd overheard. "Brooklyn," she whispered urgently, pulling my sister aside. "You didn't tell me Sadie had that kind of money. How did she afford Elena Marchetti? Is Derek's family secretly wealthy?" "She got it for $800 at an estate sale," Brooklyn replied, loud enough for several people to hear. Sadie has an incredible eye for quality. She saw something everyone else overlooked. Madison's face went through the same progression of emotions I'd watched Patricia experience. Shock, embarrassment, and then a forced smile as she realized how wrong she'd been about my taste and sophistication. The reactions were gratifying. But what meant more to me was watching Derek's face when he finally saw me walking down the aisle. The officiant had to remind him to breathe, and I could see tears in his eyes as I approached. At that moment, I knew that whether my dress cost $800 or $45,000, Derek would have thought I was the most beautiful bride in the world. The ceremony itself was perfect, intimate, heartfelt, and surrounded by the natural beauty of the cherry blossoms. When Derek slipped the ring onto my finger, I heard someone behind me whisper, "She looks like a fairy tale princess in that dress." During the reception, the dress continued to be a conversation starter. Derek's business partner, who had initially seemed skeptical about Derek marrying a small-town teacher, now treated me with new respect after learning about my fashion coup. "You've got an incredible eye for investment pieces," he told me during dinner. "Have you ever considered getting into fashion consulting?" I laughed, thinking about how dramatically perceptions had shifted based on a single piece of information. "I just bought a dress I loved. I had no idea it was an investment." "That's what makes it even more impressive," he replied. "Natural taste is worth more than all the money in the world." As the evening wound down and Derek and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Carmen approached me one final time. "I have something for you," she said, handing me a small leather portfolio. "These are the original sketches Elena made when designing your dress. She always said her creations should stay with their true owners." Inside were detailed drawings showing every aspect of the dress's construction, along with notes in Elena's handwriting about the specific materials and techniques used. It was like receiving the provenance for a priceless artwork. "Elena would have loved meeting you," Carmen continued. "She always said that her dresses had a sixth sense about finding the right person. This dress waited years for you, Sadie." As Derek and I drove away from the reception, still in our wedding attire, I reflected on the incredible journey the dress had taken me on. It tested my confidence, revealed the superficiality of others' judgments, healed my relationship with my sister, and ultimately taught me that value comes in many forms. "So," Derek said, grinning as he navigated the late-night Portland traffic, "how does it feel to be married in a museum-quality masterpiece?" "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I replied, watching the city lights blur past the yacht window. "The dress found its way to me for a reason. And what reason is that?" I thought about Mrs. Patterson's words, about Elena's belief that her creations had souls, about Brooklyn's transformation from critic to champion, and about all the people who had judged first and understood later, to remind me that the most valuable things in life aren't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes you have to look deeper to find the real treasure. Derek reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well then, I guess we're both lucky. I found my treasure too." As we drove toward our future together, I knew that long after the wedding photos faded and the memories softened, I would remember this day as the moment when I learned to trust my instincts, value authenticity over appearances, and never underestimate the power of looking beyond the surface. The dress had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had happened within me, and within the relationships that mattered most. 3 weeks after returning from our honeymoon in Tuscany, Derek and I were settling into married life when an unexpected phone call changed everything. I was grading spelling tests at our kitchen table when my phone rang with a New York area code I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Chen? This is Victoria Castellano from Metropolitan Fashion Weekly. I understand you recently wore an Elena Marchetti original to your wedding." I nearly dropped my red pen. "I'm sorry. How did you get my number?" "Carmen Rodriguez contacted us. She thought you might be interested in knowing that your dress has quite a story. Would you be available for an interview?" It turned out that Carmen had been documenting Elena Marchetti's legacy for a retrospective book, and when she mentioned finding one of Elena's unworn pieces in Portland, it had created a stir in the fashion world. Apparently, Elena's work was experiencing a renaissance, with museums and collectors desperately seeking her pieces. "Your dress is particularly significant," Victoria explained during our phone conversation. "It was Elena's final creation before she retired. She called it the Portland Rose because she designed it while visiting the International Rose Test Garden during a trip to your city. She said the Pacific Northwest inspired the organic flow of the lace pattern." I stared out my kitchen window, toward the direction of the rose garden, feeling goosebumps rise on my arms. Elena had been in Portland when she designed my dress. The connection felt impossibly cosmic. "We'd love to feature your story in our upcoming issue about hidden fashion treasures. Would you consider it?" After discussing it with Derek, who was both amused and proud, I agreed to the interview. What I didn't expect was the avalanche that followed. The Metropolitan Fashion Weekly article ran 2 months later with the headline, "Teacher Discovers $45,000. Couture Gown for $800. The Elena Marchetti Mystery Solved." The story went viral within hours. My quiet life as a Portland kindergarten teacher suddenly included interview requests from fashion blogs, lifestyle magazines, and even a segment producer from a national morning show. Brooklyn, who had moved back to New York but stayed in constant touch since the wedding, called me breathless with excitement. "Sadie, you're trending on Instagram." Portland Rose is everywhere. Fashion influencers are posting about finding hidden treasures at estate sales. You've started a whole movement. The attention was overwhelming but strangely wonderful. Messages poured in from people sharing their own stories of finding valuable items in unexpected places. Vintage Hermes scarves at garage sales, original Chanel pieces at consignment shops, antique jewelry in grandmother's attic. But the most meaningful response came from Mrs. Patterson. She called me one evening, her voice warm with satisfaction. "Dear, I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like the response to your story. But more importantly, Elena's niece contacted me from Italy. She wants to meet you." 2 weeks later, I found myself video chatting with Francesca Marchetti, an elegant woman in her 50s who lived in Florence and had been Elena's closest confidant. "Aunt Elena always said her dresses chose their owners," Francesca told me in accented English, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When I saw the photos from your wedding, I understood what she meant. The dress looks like it was created specifically for you." She went on to explain that Elena had been battling illness during her final years and had become increasingly selective about who could wear her creations. The Portland Rose had been her swan song, designed during what turned out to be her last, healthy period. She finished this dress just 2 months before she passed away, Francesca revealed. She told me it was special, that it would find its way to someone who understood that true beauty comes from within. "I think she would be very happy to know it found you." The conversation left me emotional and grateful for the mysterious forces that had brought Elena's final masterpiece into my life. But the story took another unexpected turn when Francesca made an extraordinary offer. "I'm opening a small museum dedicated to Aunt Elena's work in Florence. Would you consider lending us your dress for the inaugural exhibition?" We would love to display it alongside her sketches and personal letters about the inspiration behind it. Derek and I discussed the offer extensively. The idea of my wedding dress being displayed in an Italian museum felt surreal, but we both agreed that Elena would have wanted her work to inspire others. 6 months later, Derek and I flew to Florence for the opening of the Elena Marchetti Museum. Walking into the beautiful Renaissance palazzo that housed the exhibition, I felt like I was stepping into a fairy tale. My dress was displayed in the center of the main gallery, surrounded by Elena's sketches, fabric samples, and a detailed explanation of the Portland rose's significance as her final creation. A placard read, "On loan from Mrs. Sadie Chen, Portland, Oregon, who discovered this masterpiece and understood its value before knowing its history." The opening night gala was attended by fashion industry luminaries, Italian socialites, and art collectors from around the world. I felt completely out of my element in my simple cocktail dress until Francesca introduced me to the crowd as the woman who proved that true fashion appreciation transcends knowledge or wealth. The applause was thunderous, and as I stood in front of my wedding dress displayed like a priceless artifact, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I had been a kindergarten teacher buying a dress she loved at a local boutique. Now, I was being celebrated in Italy for my innate fashion sense and authentic appreciation of artistry. But the most gratifying moment came when a young Italian woman approached me during the reception. "Signora Chen, I read your story in Vogue Italia. I am a design student, and your experience inspired me to trust my instincts rather than just following trends. Thank you for showing that passion matters more than price tags." Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Fashion students, young designers, and even established professionals shared how my story had encouraged them to look beyond obvious choices and trust their authentic responses to beauty. Derek found me on the palazzo's terrace during a quiet moment, looking out over the twinkling lights of Florence. "Any regrets about sharing your fairy tale with the world?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "None," I replied honestly. If Elena's dress can inspire other people to trust their instincts and look deeper than surface appearances, then it's serving its purpose. Even if it means our quiet life in Portland will never be quite the same? I laughed, thinking about the fashion blog collaboration requests still flooding my email and the book deal I'd been offered to write about finding beauty in unexpected places. "Our life was never going to be ordinary once I married you," I told him. "Besides, I'm still the same person who fell in love with a dress at Mrs. Patterson's boutique. The rest is just bonus adventure." As we flew back to Portland the next day, I reflected on how a single purchase had transformed not just my wedding day, but my entire understanding of value, judgment, and the mysterious ways that meaningful things find their way into our lives. The dress would spend 6 months in Florence, inspiring visitors from around the world, before returning to my closet in Portland. But its real legacy wasn't in the museum display or the magazine articles. It was in the lesson it taught about looking beyond the surface to find the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And every morning when I walked into my kindergarten classroom, I carried that lesson with me, encouraging my students to see the potential and beauty in things that others might overlook. After all, if a cheap wedding dress could turn out to be a masterpiece, imagine what other treasures were waiting to be discovered by those willing to look with their hearts instead of their preconceptions. 2 years after the Florence exhibition, life had settled into a new normal that still felt surreal at times. Derek and I had moved into a larger house in the Alberta Arts District, partly because we needed space for all the fashion-related correspondence, and partly because I'd started hosting small events for local designers and vintage collectors. The key morning that would change everything again started like any other Tuesday. I was preparing lessons for my kindergarten class when my phone buzzed with a text from Brooklyn. "Turn on Channel 8 News right now." I grabbed the remote and flipped to the local morning show, where the anchor was standing in front of a familiar storefront with a breaking news banner that read, beloved Portland boutique, closing after 40 years. My heart sank as I recognized Mrs. Patterson's shop. The reporter was interviewing her outside, and even through the television screen, I could see the sadness in her eyes. After 4 decades of helping brides find their perfect dress, Rose and Lace Boutique will close its doors next month, the anchor announced. Owner Margaret Patterson cites rising rent costs and changing shopping patterns as the primary factors in her decision. I was out the door within minutes, driving across town with a sick feeling in my stomach. Mrs. Patterson had become like a surrogate mother to me over the past 2 years, and the thought of her losing the business she'd poured her heart into was unbearable. I found her inside the shop, surrounded by boxes and half-packed inventory. She looked up when I entered, her face brightening despite the circumstances. "Sadie, dear, I wondered when you'd show up." "Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Maybe we could start a crowdfunding campaign, or—" She held up her hand with a gentle smile. "Sweet girl, you've already done more than you know. The publicity from your Elena Marchetti story brought me 2 wonderful years of new customers. Brides came from as far as Seattle hoping to find their own hidden treasure. Then why are you closing? Because sometimes knowing when to end a beautiful story is as important as knowing how to begin one." She gestured around the shop. "I'm 78 years old, and my arthritis makes it harder to do alterations. The building owner wants to triple the rent for a tech company. It's time." Over the next hour, she told me about her plans. She was moving to assisted living, but first, she needed to find homes for her remaining inventory. Dozens of dresses, veils, and accessories collected over decades. "I have one favor to ask you," she said, pulling out a familiar folder. "There are 3 more Elena Marchetti pieces in my back room. They came from the same estate sale as your dress, but I've been saving them for the right people." She led me to a climate-controlled storage area I'd never seen before. Hanging there were 3 breathtaking gowns, each with Elena's distinctive style, but completely different from my Portland Rose. "This one," she said, touching a dress with intricate beadwork, was called Midnight Garden in Elena's notes. "And this," she moved to a simpler but elegant design, "was Venice Dawn. The third is Roman Holiday." Elena apparently loved naming her pieces after places that inspired her. I stared at the dresses, each worth tens of thousands of dollars. "Mrs. Patterson, you could sell these to collectors. They'd set you up financially for life." "Money isn't what I need, dear. I need to know they'll go to brides who will love them for the right reasons, just like you did. Will you help me find them?" That afternoon, I called Derek from the shop, explaining the situation. Without hesitation, he suggested we buy the remaining inventory, not to resell, but to continue Mrs. Patterson's mission of connecting brides with dresses that spoke to them. "We could start a foundation," he said over the phone. "Help brides who can't afford expensive dresses but have the same eye for beauty that you do." The idea grew from there. Within weeks, we'd established the Elena Marchetti Foundation, dedicated to making beautiful wedding attire accessible to brides regardless of their budget. Mrs. Patterson agreed to serve as our advisor, and Carmen Rodriguez flew in from Los Angeles to help authenticate the pieces we'd be working with. But finding the right brides for Elena's remaining pieces required a different approach. We couldn't just put them online or in a traditional store. These dresses needed to find their people organically. That's when Brooklyn had her brilliant idea. She'd been working as a freelance fashion consultant since her return to New York and suggested we create a series of pop-up events, not sales, but experiences where brides could discover dresses naturally. We'll call them hidden treasures, she proposed during a video call. Like a treasure hunt for wedding dresses, brides won't know what's available until they arrive, and they'll choose based purely on how the dresses make them feel. Our first event was held in the renovated warehouse, space Derek's company had outgrown. We invited 20 brides-to-be who'd responded to a simple social media post asking for women who valued authenticity over price tags. The morning of the event, I felt nervous as we arranged the dresses. Not just Elena's pieces, but beautiful gowns from various eras and designers that Mrs. Patterson had curated over the years. Each dress was displayed without price tags or designer labels. The first bride to arrive was Maria Santos, a nurse from Beaverton who'd been planning to wear her mother's altered dress because she couldn't afford anything new. When she saw the midnight garden dress, her reaction was immediate and visceral. "It's like it's calling to me," she whispered, running her fingers along the beadwork. She tried it on, and the transformation was magical. The dress fit her perfectly, and her fiancé, who'd been skeptical about the whole event, actually teared up when he saw her. "How much?" Maria asked, clearly bracing herself for disappointment. "For you? $500, I replied, watching her face light up with disbelief and joy. By the end of the day, all 3 Elena Marchetti dresses had found their homes. Venice Dawn went to Sarah Kim, an environmental scientist who'd fallen in love with the dress's organic lines. Roman Holiday chose Jessica Brown, a social worker who'd been saving for 2 years to buy a wedding dress and couldn't believe she was taking home a piece of fashion history for less than she'd budgeted. But the most moving moment came when Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside as the event was winding down. "Do you see what you've done?" she asked, gesturing toward the brides who were laughing and taking photos in their chosen dresses. "You've created exactly what Elena always dreamed of, a place where dresses find their true owners based on love, not labels." 6 months later, our Hidden Treasures events had expanded to other cities. Brooklyn had moved back to Portland to help run the foundation full-time, and we'd helped over 100 brides find their perfect dresses at prices they could afford. The foundation had also attracted attention from other designers' estates, vintage collectors, and even contemporary designers who wanted to donate pieces to brides who would appreciate them. We were creating a network of people who believed that beauty and quality shouldn't be limited to those who could afford designer price tags. Derek often joked that my $800 wedding dress had become the most expensive purchase we'd ever made, considering everything it had led to. But sitting in our foundation's new headquarters, the renovated space that had once been Mrs. Patterson's boutique, I knew we'd found our purpose. Elena Marchetti's final dress hadn't just found its way to me. It had started a movement that was changing how people thought about value, beauty, and the stories that clothes can tell. And every time I watched a bride discover her perfect dress in our treasure hunt events, I was reminded that sometimes the most meaningful treasures are the ones we share with others. The Portland Rose was still hanging in our bedroom closet, but its real legacy was living on in every bride who learned to trust her instincts over price tags, and every dress that found its way to someone who would love it for all the right reasons. 5 years after that fateful day at Mrs. Patterson's boutique, I stood in the grand ballroom of the Portland Art Museum, watching 300 guests mingle beneath glittering chandeliers. Tonight was the Elena Marchetti Foundation's annual gala, and the theme was Hidden Treasures, Stories of Discovery. The evening had a deeper significance than anyone knew. After years of declining health, Mrs. Patterson had passed away peacefully 3 months earlier, leaving behind a letter that would change everything once again. Derek approached me, adjusting his bow tie with the same nervous energy he'd had on our wedding day. 5 minutes until your speech. You ready?" I looked around the room at familiar faces mixed with new ones. Brides whose lives had been touched by our foundation, designers who'd donated pieces, collectors who'd become believers in our mission. Brooklyn was across the room, elegant in a vintage halston she'd found at one of our treasure hunt events, deep in conversation with Carmen Rodriguez, who'd flown in from Los Angeles for tonight's celebration. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, touching the simple gold locket Derek had given me for our 5th anniversary. Inside was a tiny photograph of my Portland Rose dress, a reminder of where this all began. The speech I was about to give would reveal Mrs. Patterson's final secret, one that tied together every thread of our story in a way I never could have imagined. As the guests took their seats, I approached the podium, looking out at faces illuminated by the warm museum lighting. Some of these people had been part of our journey from the beginning. Others were discovering our story for the first time tonight. 5 years ago, I began. I walked into a small boutique on Northwest 23rd, looking for a wedding dress. I had no idea that decision would change not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of brides across the Pacific Northwest. I told the abbreviated version of my story, finding the dress, Brooklyn's criticism, the revelation of its true value, and everything that had followed. But then I reached the part that only Derek, Brooklyn, and I knew. 3 months ago, we lost our beloved friend and mentor, Margaret Patterson. But before she passed, she entrusted me with a letter that reveals the final chapter of Elena Marchetti's story and explains the true miracle of how these dresses found their way to Portland. I pulled out the aged envelope, its contents having been verified by handwriting experts and art historians over the past months. Mrs. Patterson wasn't just a boutique owner who happened to acquire Elena Marchetti pieces at an estate sale. She was Elena's daughter. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Even I still felt emotional saying those words aloud. Margaret Patterson was born Margaret Marchetti in Florence in 1945. When she was 23, she immigrated to America after falling in love with James Patterson, a soldier she'd met during his station time in Italy. Her mother, Elena, was devastated by her decision to leave, and their relationship became strained. I paused, looking at Carmen, who was wiping away tears. She'd known Elena personally, but never knew about the daughter who'd moved to America. Elena spent the next 30 years creating the most beautiful wedding dresses in the world, but she never stopped missing her daughter. When Elena became ill in 2018, she made a decision that would bridge the gap between them one final time. The room was completely silent as I continued reading Mrs. Patterson's letter. Elena secretly arranged for her entire remaining inventory, including my Portland rose and the 3 other dresses we later found, to be sent to Margaret's boutique. She didn't want them sold to collectors or museums. She wanted them to find brides who would love them authentically, just as her daughter had always believed they should. I looked up from the letter to see faces full of wonder and emotion throughout the ballroom. Mrs. Patterson spent her final years watching Elena's dresses find their perfect matches, never revealing that she was reuniting with her mother through each bride's joy. She wrote that seeing me fall in love with the Portland rose felt like Elena's spirit was finally at peace. Brooklyn stood up from her table, tears streaming down her face as she began to applaud. The entire room followed suit, the ovation lasting several minutes as people processed the profound connection that had been hidden in plain sight. When the applause died down, I shared the final surprise of the evening. Mrs. Patterson left her entire estate to the Elena Marchetti Foundation, including documentation of 37 additional Elena Marchetti pieces stored in climate-controlled facilities around the country. But more than that, she left us her mother's design journals, sketches, and even fabric samples, a complete archive of Elena's creative process. Carmen stood up at her table, clearly overwhelmed. Sadie, this means we can complete the definitive book about Elena's work. These journals fill in gaps we've wondered about for decades. And, I continued, we can ensure that Elena's final wish is honored. Every single one of her remaining pieces will find its way to a bride who chooses it. With her heart, not her wallet. The evening continued with stories from brides whose lives had been touched by our foundation. Maria Santos, who'd worn the Midnight Garden dress, spoke about how finding her dream dress had given her confidence to pursue a promotion at the hospital where she worked. Sarah Kim shared how her Venice Dawn gown had connected her to her own grandmother's love of vintage fashion, healing a family rift in the process. But the most powerful moment came when a young woman named Ashley Martinez approached the microphone. During the open sharing portion of the evening, "I'm getting married next month," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been saving for 3 years to afford a wedding dress, but everything in my budget looked disappointing. Last week I attended one of your Hidden Treasures events, not expecting to find anything. She gestured toward the dress she was wearing, a stunning 1960s creation that seemed to glow under the museum lights. This dress chose me, just like everyone said it would. But it's not just about the dress. It's about learning that my taste and instincts matter, regardless of my bank account. You've taught me that I deserve beauty, even if I can't afford the price tag that usually comes with it. As Ashley returned to her seat to thunderous applause, I felt the full weight of what Mrs. Patterson's secret had revealed. The Elena Marchetti Foundation hadn't just happened by chance. It was the culmination of a mother and daughter's love story, played out across decades and cultures, finally finding resolution through the brides whose joy had healed old wounds. Later that evening, as Derek and I walked through the quiet museum corridors after the last guest had left, I reflected on the incredible journey that had started with a simple desire to find a wedding dress I loved. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd listened to Brooklyn and bought a different dress? Derek asked, taking my hand as we paused in front of a Renaissance painting of a woman in flowing robes. Never, I replied without hesitation. Even without knowing about Mrs. Patterson's connection to Elena, that dress was meant for me. It taught me to trust my instincts, brought us closer as sisters, and showed me that the most meaningful things in life often come disguised as ordinary moments. And now? I thought about the hundreds of brides who would benefit from Elena's remaining dresses, about the design archive that would preserve her legacy, about the foundation that would continue connecting authentic treasures with people who would cherish them. Now I know that some stories are bigger than we can see at the time. Elena created beautiful dresses, but she also created a legacy of believing that everyone deserves to feel beautiful on their most important day. Mrs. Patterson carried that legacy to America and spent 40 years making it real for Portland brides, and somehow, mysteriously, it all led to me walking into her shop on exactly the right day to find exactly the right dress. As we drove home through the Portland streets where this entire journey had unfolded, I thought about the Portland rose hanging in our bedroom closet. Tomorrow, it will be professionally preserved and displayed permanently in the Elena Marchetti Foundation headquarters, inspiring future brides to trust their hearts over their budgets. But its real legacy would live on in every bride who learned that true value isn't about price tags or designer labels. It's about finding something that makes your soul sing and having the confidence to choose it, regardless of what anyone else thinks. The weeks following the gala brought unexpected developments that none of us could have anticipated. Carmen called me from Los Angeles with news that would expand our understanding of Elena's legacy even further. "Sadie, you need to sit down for this," she said, her voice crackling with excitement through the phone. "I've been going through Elena's design journals from Mrs. Patterson's estate, and I found something extraordinary hidden in the back pages." She explained that Elena had been secretly documenting every bride who wore her creations, not just the famous clients everyone knew about. There were photographs, letters from brides, and even pressed flowers from their bouquets that Elena had saved over the decades. "But here's the incredible part," Carmen continued. Elena wrote detailed notes about her hopes for each dress. She believed that her creations had destinies beyond their first wearing. She wanted them to have multiple love stories, to bring joy to different women throughout their existence. This discovery led to what Brooklyn dubbed the Elena Project, a massive undertaking to trace the histories of Elena's dresses and connect with the families who had inherited them. Many pieces had been stored away after weddings, waiting in closets and attics for decades. Our first success came when Carmen's research led us to the Rosewood family in Marin County, California. Elena's 1987 creation, Sunset Serenade, had been worn by grandmother Elizabeth Rosewood, then stored carefully for 35 years. When we contacted the family, we discovered that Elizabeth's granddaughter Jenny was engaged and had been struggling to find a dress that felt right. The reunion between Jenny and Sunset Serenade was magical. The dress fit her perfectly, and the Emotional connection to her grandmother's memory made the moment even more powerful. But what touched me most was Mrs. Rosewood's reaction when we told her about Elena's vision for her dresses having multiple love stories. Elizabeth would have loved knowing that her wedding dress would bring joy to another bride, she said through tears during our video call. She always said that beautiful things were meant to be shared, not hidden away. This philosophy became the cornerstone of our expanded mission. We began reaching out to families across the country, offering them the opportunity to see their inherited Elena Marchetti pieces worn again by brides who would treasure them. Some families chose to keep their dresses, but many were moved by the idea of continuing their loved one's love story. The most remarkable discovery came 6 months later when we received an unexpected visitor at our Portland headquarters. Dr. Isabella Conti, a fashion historian from the University of Milan, had flown to America specifically to meet with us. "I have been researching Elena Marchetti for my doctoral thesis," she explained in accented English, sitting in our conference room with several thick folders spread before her. "But my research has uncovered something that changes everything we thought we knew about her final years." Dr. Conti revealed that Elena had been corresponding with fashion schools across America in the months before her death, outlining a vision for sustainable haute couture that would make luxury craftsmanship accessible to working-class brides. She wrote extensively about the wastefulness of the fashion industry, Dr. Conti explained, showing us copies of Elena's letters. She believed that truly beautiful garments should have long lives, should be worn and loved repeatedly, rather than stored away after one use. Elena's letters described a dream system remarkably similar to what we had created, events where brides could discover high-quality pieces based on emotional connection rather than marketing or price. She had even sketched out ideas for preservation, techniques that would allow dresses to maintain their beauty through multiple wearings. "In essence," Dr. Conti concluded, "you have created exactly what Elena Marchetti envisioned as her final contribution to the world of fashion. The Elena Marchetti Foundation is not just preserving her legacy, you are fulfilling her ultimate vision." This revelation led to an invitation that changed everything once again. The University of Milan wanted to establish an American campus for their fashion preservation program, and they wanted the Elena Marchetti Foundation to be their partner institution. The proposal was ambitious. Create a school where students would learn traditional couture techniques while also studying sustainable fashion practices. Students would work with vintage and donated pieces, learning to restore and adapt them for modern brides while preserving their historical integrity. Derek and I spent weeks discussing the implications. Accepting would mean expanding far beyond our original mission, potentially moving to Milan part-time, and taking on responsibilities we'd never imagined. But it also meant ensuring that Elena's techniques and philosophy would be passed down to future generations. Brooklyn was the one who convinced us to say yes. "Think about it," she said during one of our family dinners. "Mrs. Patterson spent 40 years secretly carrying out Elena's mission in Portland. Now we have the chance to take that mission global. Elena's dresses found their way to us for a reason." The Milan announcement created another media sensation. Fashion Week coverage, international magazine features, and documentary film inquiries poured in. But the response that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. Ashley Martinez, the young woman who had spoken at our gala about finding her dress at a Hidden Treasures event, called me 3 weeks after her wedding. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to tell you something," she said, her voice bright with happiness. "At my wedding, 7 different women asked me about my dress, not because they recognized a designer label, but because they could see how happy it made me. 3 of them have signed up for your next treasure hunt event." She went on to explain that her wedding photographer had been so moved by her story that he was now offering pro bono services to Elena Marchetti Foundation brides. Her florist had created a signature Hidden Treasures bouquet style incorporating unexpected elements, Even her venue had started partnering with us to offer discounted rates to foundation brides. "It's like ripples in a pond," Ashley said. "Your story is changing how people think about weddings, about value, about what really matters." Similar stories began reaching us from across the country. Brides who had found dresses through our foundation were inspiring their friends and family, members to look beyond superficial markers of success. Wedding vendors were partnering with us, offering their services at reduced rates to couples who shared our philosophy. The most touching story came from Detroit, where foundation bride Michelle Thompson had started her own nonprofit, providing professional attire to women re-entering the workforce. She'd been inspired by how finding her perfect dress had boosted her confidence and wanted to create that same feeling for women facing other life transitions. "You taught me that everyone deserves to feel beautiful and confident," she wrote in her letter to us. "I'm just extending that philosophy beyond weddings." As I read Michelle's letter in our Portland office, surrounded by Elena's original sketches now professionally framed on the walls, I marveled at the interconnected web of inspiration that had grown from a single dress purchase. Each bride's story was creating new stories. Each act of authentic choosing was encouraging others to trust their own instincts. The success of our mission brought unexpected challenges, too. Fashion magazines wanted to feature specific dresses, potentially driving up their perceived value and defeating our purpose. Wealthy collectors offered enormous sums for Elena's pieces, tempting us with funding that could expand our programs but would remove dresses from their intended purpose. Mrs. Patterson's journals, which we'd discovered among her personal effects, provided guidance for these dilemmas. She had faced similar pressures over the years, recording her thoughts about maintaining the integrity of Elena's vision while adapting to changing circumstances. "The dresses must choose their brides," she had written in 1998. "No amount of money or prestige should override that fundamental truth. Elena's creations have souls, and souls cannot be bought, only recognized by kindred spirits." Using Mrs. Patterson's wisdom, we established strict guidelines for our expanding program. No dress could be reserved or purchased in advance. No bride could know which designers or pieces would be available at any given event. Every selection had to happen organically, based on the emotional connection between bride and dress. These principles were tested when Hollywood actress Sophia Reeves wanted to wear an Elena Marchetti piece to her high-profile wedding. The publicity would have been enormous for our foundation, but we held firm to our guidelines. Sophia would have to attend a Hidden Treasures event like any other bride and hope that a dress chose her. To her credit, Sophia not only attended an event in Los Angeles but brought 3 of her friends who were also engaged. None of them found Elena Marchetti pieces that day, but all 4 women discovered vintage dresses that they described as perfect for their individual styles and personalities. The story of Sophia's authentic experience at our event created more positive publicity than any manufactured celebrity endorsement could have generated. She became an unofficial ambassador for our philosophy, speaking in interviews about the joy of choosing a dress based on love rather than label recognition. By the Foundation's 7th anniversary, we had facilitated over 2,000 dress discoveries across 15 cities. Elena's original pieces had found new homes with brides from every conceivable background: teachers like me, doctors, artists, small business owners, students, and retirees celebrating second marriages. Each story was unique, but they all shared common themes: the joy of trusting authentic instincts, the confidence that comes from choosing with your heart, and the recognition that true value transcends price tags and brand names. Standing in our expanded Portland headquarters, watching volunteers prepare for another Hidden Treasures event, I often thought about the mysterious forces that had aligned to create this movement. Elena's vision, Mrs. Patterson's quiet dedication, my accidental discovery, Brooklyn's transformation from critic to champion, each element had been necessary for the whole story to unfold. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest decisions. Mine began with buying a dress I loved. 7 years later, it has become a story about how authentic choices create ripple effects that touch lives in ways we never could have imagined, proving that when we trust our deepest instincts about beauty and value, we open doorways to magic that was waiting for us all along. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And, hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.